Welcome, weary traveler, as we journey through the corridors of history. With the moon casting its glow over the quiet world, I invite you to join me in this exploration of the past. Get comfortable, relax, and allow my voice to guide you into the dreamlike realms of a fascinating yet troubling period in Japan's feudal history. Before we embark on our adventure, I'd love to hear from you. Whether you are tucked under blankets, ready to drift off, or simply looking for a moment of serenity, please share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. If you find solace in exploring historical tales as a way to unwind, consider subscribing so you won't miss these soothing journeys through time. Now let's settle in as we prepare to uncover the realities of a time gone by. This evening, we'll delve into the often harsh and oppressive lives of women during feudal Japan. Fear not, for I will be here to gently lead you through this unfamiliar landscape. Regardless of how difficult the truths we reveal may be, my calming narration will enable you to lie back, listen, and let your imagination drift. As we start, envision yourself as a woman in the 14th century Japan. It's challenging for modern individuals to fully comprehend how vastly different life was, particularly for women. With virtually every aspect of their existence dictated by societal norms, they exercised very little personal freedom or autonomy. From the moment they were born until their demise, their destinies were largely predetermined by forces they could not control. Throughout our time together tonight, we will trace the path of a typical woman as she experiences each stage of life in feudal Japan, from her birth and childhood through adolescence and marriage, motherhood, family life, and ultimately, her later years. We will view the world from her perspective. As we delve into this narrative, we'll encounter some extraordinary women from history who discovered ways to leave their imprint on the world, despite the tremendous restrictions imposed upon them. So, as you nestle deeper under the covers and begin to feel the pull of sleep edging into your awareness, let us embark on our journey back to feudal Japan together. Take a deep breath in, then exhale gently, allowing the sounds of the present to fade into the distance. The only voice you hear now is mine, and we exist in Japan from 6 centuries past. Our tale commences with a birth, but not one celebrated with much excitement. In this era, female infants were often regarded as less valuable than their male counterparts. Families eagerly anticipated the birth of a son who would carry on the family legacy and manage the estate and responsibilities. A daughter, on the other hand, was perceived as a temporary figure, destined to leave for her husband's family one day. She could not continue the family line in the same way. At best, a girl would help with household duties until marriage, lacking recognition as a permanent member of her birth family. In some instances, if a family already had multiple daughters, a newborn girl might bring disappointment and be viewed as a burden. Though it was becoming rarer by the feudal era, instances of female infanticide still occurred. Baby girls were often seen merely as another mouth to feed until they were married off. Not every family possessed the means or the desire to care for them, no matter how harsh that reality may sound to today's ears. So, let's envision that by fortunate circumstance, your family decides to keep and raise you, their baby girl. From your earliest days, the expectations surrounding you are crystal clear. As you transition from an infant to a young girl, your family concentrates on teaching you to be subservient, obedient, humble, and proficient in domestic skills. Engaging with dolls is embraced as it is viewed as preparation for one day nurturing your own family. Experiencing life alongside the women in your household as they engage in cleaning, cooking, sewing, and other daily tasks is a fundamental aspect of your upbringing. It was extremely uncommon for a girl to receive an education comparable to that of her brothers. Girls from samurai families might attain basic literacy and could be instructed in traditional skills such as calligraphy, flower arranging, or playing instruments. Nevertheless, a comprehensive education covering classic literature, philosophy, governance, and martial disciplines was almost entirely reserved for boys. The education of a girl focused on preparing her to be a suitable wife and mother rather than fostering her intellectual or martial abilities. Despite these limitations, history shows us that some extraordinary women challenged the status quo. One notable figure from a few centuries preceding the feudal era we discuss is Murasaki Shikibu. Born to a noble family in the late 900s, Murasaki benefited from a remarkably extensive education provided by her father, who recognized her keen intellect. Eventually, she became a lady-in-waiting at the imperial court and authored the timeless classic The Tale of Genji, which many regard as the first true novel. As a girl living in feudal times, you may hear Murasaki's story recounted as an apocryphal tale, a near-mythical representation of what women could achieve under exceptional conditions. Yet you would understand that her experience was the exception rather than the norm. Regardless of any inherent talent or goals you might have, your future is predetermined. To become a wife and mother with minimal space for personal ambitions. Consequently, your formative years pass by closely alongside your mother, learning and readying yourself for the life that awaits you. Your existence is confined primarily within your family's home, with perhaps occasional visits to a temple or market. However, this world of yours will soon expand, generally between the ages of 13 to 16, though not in a manner of your choosing. The moment has arrived for your parents to arrange your marriage. This union is not based on love. Romance plays a minimal role in feudal Japan marriages. Instead, your parents prioritize social standing, political connections, and the best way to enhance family ties through your match. If you're fortunate, your husband may be closer to your age rather than significantly older. It's possible you've crossed paths with him a few times, or he may be a complete stranger. Your preferences in this decision are, of course, disregarded. You receive notice of your parents' selection and begin to prepare for the move from the only home you've ever known to integrate into your husband's household. You'll reside with his parents and siblings, taking on the lowest rank among the women in your new family. The idea is overwhelming, yet as a proper feudal Japanese girl, you have been conditioned to be compliant and submissive. To question or resist the course that has been set for you would be unimaginable. As you gather your belongings to bid farewell to your childhood, let's take a moment to reflect on another young woman who undertook a similar journey. Lady Tokugawa Masako emerged from a prominent samurai family in 1183. At just 15 years of age, she was married to the son of the reigning shogun. Masako quickly found herself thrust into the pinnacle of feudal power and intrigue. However, her marriage was not merely an alliance of noble families, it represented a crucial political strategy. Her young husband was already being prepared to eventually assume control of all Japan as the next shogun. This placed tremendous pressure on Masako to secure her position within the dynasty by bearing an heir, specifically a male heir. Without a son to inherit the shogunate, her husband's family would lose its influence, and Masako would forfeit her own safety and status. Thus, as Masako left her family home, still a child herself, she bore the heavy burden of dynastic aspirations on her delicate shoulders. The pressure for her to promptly bear a son was merely the beginning of a lifetime filled with rigorous responsibilities and constant evaluation in her new position. Her primary purpose in life, like that of every woman during her era, was to give birth to children. Soon we will delve deeper into the often grim realities faced by mothers in feudal Japan. But first, Let us return to you, our central character, as you take your initial steps into matrimony and away from the comforting familiarity of your upbringing. Clad in your most elegant kimono, you stand beside your new husband, bowing respectfully to your in-laws. The life you once knew has now come to an end. Your duty is to fulfill the needs of your husband's household, and even your birth name will gradually fade from memory. As a new bride, you are expected to swiftly grasp the customs of your husband's family. His mother becomes your primary mentor, critic, and taskmaster. She will instruct you on her preferences for meal preparation, how to properly wash and repair the household's clothing, and the appropriate rituals for honoring family ancestors. A misstep or any indication of homesickness or defiance could result in her swift reprimand. You must embody the notion of the ideal wife, humble, gentle, obedient, and most importantly, fertile, as this is the true measure of your value in this new existence. The children you produce, particularly the sons, will define your place in this world. You are likely to conceive within the first year of marriage, as your husband will often seek your company at night. Contraceptive options are almost non-existent, and you possess little real authority to decline his advances. Your body is now largely subject to the control of him and his family. As your body begins to show signs of carrying your first child, you will continue with your daily responsibilities as a young wife for as long as possible. Ideally, your mother-in-law may extend some kindness as your pregnancy progresses, perhaps permitting you to rest a bit more or enjoy a little extra food. But pregnancy is not viewed as an illness or a disability. You are still expected to carry out your household responsibilities as a woman for as long as possible. Let's momentarily shift our focus from your narrative to examine another real individual who epitomized the life of a typical feudal Japanese wife. A generation or two prior to your time, there was a woman named Nano Tiao. Born to a destitute peasant family in the early 1600s, Tiao married a local rice farmer as a teenager and immediately began laboring alongside him in the paddies, often up to her knees in mud, even while pregnant with her children. Throughout the years, Tiao bore 6 children for her husband, toiling in the fields before and after each delivery. As a peasant woman, she didn't have the privilege of focusing exclusively on managing the household like samurai or noblewomen. Instead, Tiao and her husband barely scraped by, farming their small plot of land, making her contribution to the grueling labor essential. 2 of her infants perished in infancy, which was not unusual for that time. The fatigue and inadequate nutrition characteristic of peasant life made pregnancy and childbirth even more perilous. Thus, Tiao persevered like most women of her era, sacrificing her own health and comfort for the well-being of her husband and surviving children. For her, there was no genuine alternative or other choice. From dawn until dusk, she labored either in the fields or inside, preparing meals, mending clothing, and struggling to extend their meager resources to keep the family alive. Her life was one of severe subsistence and relentless toil. Now back to you, our protagonist, hopefully born into a slightly higher social class than Tiao, but still confined by many of the same societal expectations. As your pregnancy advances and the day of delivery approaches, you offer additional prayers to Shinto kami and Buddhist deities for the safety of you and your baby during the perils of childbirth. You are well aware of the whispered stories of women in your family and community who have died in the process, fully aware of the risks involved. As your labor pains commence, you retreat to a designated birthing room within your home, accompanied by a midwife and possibly a few other skilled women. You endure the process with both courage and apprehension. In this era, there is minimal understanding of childbirth, so if any complications arise, your options are severely limited. There are no doctors, no medical facilities, and none of the interventions that might rescue you or your child if difficulties occur. All that's left is to bite your lip, follow instructions, and hold on to hope. After exhausting hours, you finally welcome a wailing infant into the world. To your great joy and relief, the midwife reveals that you've given birth to a healthy baby boy on your first attempt. You are aware that this news will bring immense happiness to your husband and in-laws. In their eyes, as well as society's, you have affirmed your value as both a woman and a wife. A son to continue the family lineage is the most significant gift you could present to your husband's household. In the days following your delivery, as you heal from the physical effects of childbirth, your focus shifts to nurturing and cherishing your delightful son. As a wife of the samurai class, you are not expected to return to work immediately. Your role is now to prioritize caring for your baby. You nurse him, wrap him snugly in blankets, sing lullabies, and shower him with love. Your husband also finds joy in this new addition. Had you given birth to a daughter, the family would still celebrate, but the occasion would be less exuberant. As you understand now, a daughter will one day leave the family to wed, while your son will remain and inherit his father's position and status. You will indeed raise your daughter with affection, but also with the awareness that you are preparing her for a life of service to her future husband, just as your own mother did for you. Yet we need not linger on that bittersweet reality, for your narrative is enriched by the arrival of a beloved son. As your son evolves from a vulnerable infant into an energetic toddler and eventually a spirited young boy, you take immense pride in nurturing and guiding him. It falls upon you to instill the values of your samurai heritage: loyalty, bravery, honor, and discipline. While your husband oversees his formal education and martial arts practice, you remain the devoted, patient mother ever present in the background. As your son matures, so does your family. Within the span of 10 years, you welcome 4 additional children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Each pregnancy and childbirth brings its own anxieties, yet you now feel more assured in your maternal role. You assign household responsibilities to your daughters as soon as they are old enough, training them to be suitable wives one day, just as your mother-in-law had prepared you. Thus, the years flow by as your children flourish. Your primary focus remains within the home, ensuring the well-being of your offspring and managing domestic affairs effectively. When your husband is away for battles or official duties, you take charge of the household, making certain bills are settled, servants are properly supervised, and that the family lacks for nothing. You take pride in your effectiveness and proficiency in this domain. In some respects, your life is more manageable than that of a woman from a lower class during this period. You are spared from arduous physical labor and have servants to assist with various menial tasks. However, in many ways, the life of a samurai wife is still quite confined and limited. Unlike a peasant woman who may collaborate with her husband and have a bit more influence in their shared existence, a samurai wife remains subordinate and detached from her husband's sphere of politics and warfare. These class distinctions were strictly enforced by law in your feudal society. Japan's social hierarchy was rigidly maintained, with regulations dictating what each class could wear, consume, and even how they could style their hair. As a female samurai, you could face punishment merely for wearing silk, designated for the elite, for instance. Conversely, a peasant woman could incur severe penalties for dressing above her social class. The movement across social strata was extremely limited. Even among samurai ranks, women were regarded as subordinate to men. While samurai women led a more privileged lifestyle than their lower-class counterparts, they remained bound by the same restrictions regarding personal freedoms, legal entitlements, and educational opportunities. Both a peasant woman and a samurai woman had no freedom to travel, possess land, select their husbands, or engage in activities outside the permitted domestic arts. Nevertheless, some remarkable women succeeded in challenging the stereotype of the passive samurai spouse. One notable figure was Hojo Masako, who lived roughly a century before our feudal protagonist. Masako was married to Minamoto no Yoritomo, the first Kamakura shogun, and was celebrated for her intellect, courage, and political skill. Rather than conforming to the traditional role of samurai wives who remained in the shadows, Masako became a vital advisor to her husband, contributing to state and military strategy. She was an accomplished archer and even fought alongside him in battles. Following his death, Masako skillfully positioned her family in power, making decisions in her son's name and thwarting attempts at coups against her clan. Although she ultimately retired into a Buddhist nunhood in her later years, she continued to exert influence from the convent until her passing. However, Masako's level of education and her engagement in the realms of politics and warfare were exceptionally rare for women of that era. She carved her place in history partly due to her unique status as the shogun's wife and her vigorous personality that transcended the domestic boundaries. Her story would have undoubtedly resonated with future generations of samurai women like yourself, a tantalizing glimpse of what your life could be if only society permitted it. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of women in feudal Japan, Masako's journey was an unattainable fantasy. While your own circumstances might be steadier and more comfortable in comparison to a peasant woman's, you still find yourself on a constrained and preordained path. Your worth is derived from your duties as a wife and mother in your husband's household, rather than from any individual talents, aspirations, or personal interests. So, let's revisit your story, shall we? The years have passed quickly, and your eldest son has transformed into a young man of 16 on the verge of adulthood. Your two younger boys are not far behind, robust and healthy. The life of a peasant woman in feudal Japan was characterized by relentless labor with few comforts or moments of respite. From before dawn until well past dusk, the responsibilities of maintaining a household and contributing to the family's survival consumed nearly every waking hour. For Nano Teko, her day commenced in darkness as she got up from her makeshift bed on the earthen floor. Trying not to disturb her snoring husband and the younger children still nestled in sleep, she stirred the coals in the hearth, reviving them to boil water for the morning's meager rice porridge. As the sky turned from dark to grey, she tied her hair back, dampened by the humid morning air that heralded yet another blistering day in the fields. By the time her family awakened and gathered around the low wooden table, Teo had already been active for over an hour, tending to the numerous chores that kept the household afloat, mending garments, sweeping the packed earth, and cleaning the dishes from the previous night. The toil of a peasant woman was never-ending. After a quick breakfast hastily consumed in silence, the men, her husband and two older sons, set off to the rice paddies, the plots of land their feudal lord permitted them to cultivate in exchange for their labor and loyalty. Though only in her mid-30s, Teo's face bore deep lines etched by years of concern and toil, her hands rough and aged beyond her years. As a young bride, she had entered her husband's family home, a common destiny for girls from the village. Her mother-in-law, a strict matriarch commanding the household, set Teo to work right away, handling cooking, cleaning, and serving the men. However, the main expectation placed on Teo, as with all wives, was to bear children, particularly sons, to inherit the family estate and uphold the family lineage. In that regard, she was lucky, having given her husband two healthy boys within the initial years of marriage. Yet the childbirths were arduous. She endured long labors on the hard floor of their hut, with only her mother-in-law and a village midwife providing support. Teo lost her voice from screaming, her vocal cords torn, resulting in a voice that was forever hoarse. To her, this was a minor sacrifice for the blessing of living sons. After that, the babies came with regularity, roughly every 2 years. With scant recovery between pregnancies and no respite from her daily duties, Teo grew thin and weary, aging decades in just a few short years. 2 additional boys followed, and to her disappointment, a pair of daughters arrived. While she adored all her children, Teo understood that daughters were often seen as a burden, merely another mouth to feed, until they were married off. She silently apologized to her husband, feeling as though she had somehow let him down. Once her daughters could walk steadily, Teo enlisted them in household tasks and brought them into the fields with her. Unlike her sons, who would go to the village school to learn reading and writing, Teo's daughters would receive no education. Their destinies, like their mothers, lay entirely in domestic service, initially to their parents and subsequently to their husbands. It pained Teo to envision such limited futures for her vibrant daughters, yet she recognized no other options for them in their inflexible feudal society. With the younger children by her side, Teko spent her days laboring in the rice paddies alongside men knee-deep in the muddy water as she helped with the planting, weeding, and harvesting of the rice that provided their physical and economic sustenance. There were no weekends or holidays. It was an endless cycle of sowing and gathering, occasionally interrupted by village festivals or religious events. Even while pregnant, Teko's work never slowed. She stifled her moans of discomfort as she crouched over the rows of rice seedlings, her belly bulging and straining against her coarse cotton kimono, squinting against the harsh sunlight reflecting off the paddies. Teko wiped away the sweat and tears mingling on her cheeks, feeling the child within her shift, almost as if protesting its cramped, demanding environment. Contemplating her unborn baby brought a torrent of emotions. She felt hope that it would be a healthy son, bringing pride to the family, but also fear of complications or a challenging birth in the absence of any basic medical care. A wave of bitter resignation washed over her at the thought that her own life might be cut short by the continual cycles of pregnancy and childbirth, an almost certain peril given the era's high maternal mortality rates. As the sun sank lower over the verdant patchwork of rice fields, Teko straightened with difficulty, pressing a dirt-covered hand against the small of her back, where the pain was sharpest. She gathered her daughters, who had been busy chasing away hungry birds from the crops, and began the slow trek back to the village, precarious empty baskets balanced on her head. Behind her, Teko's husband and sons carried their tools, their gazes fixed resignedly on the ground. Silence enveloped them. The labor was so exhausting that any remaining energy for conversation felt like an indulgent luxury. Teko mused, "What is there to discuss?" Their existence was limited by the relentless quest to extract sufficient sustenance from the earth to nourish their families and meet their tax obligations. Season after season, year upon year, devoid of change or respite, they were caught in the numbing routines of survival. Inside the cramped quarters of the family's dwelling, Teo reignites the cooking fire and begins to prepare dinner. As the rice pot simmers and the pickled vegetables are arranged, she gathers the entire family around the low table, prioritizing her husband and sons in the serving before finally sitting down to her own meal. In the hazy dimness, Teo scans her family, the flickering flames casting shadows over their weary faces. A pang of sadness overwhelms her as she reflects momentarily on the daughter she will never meet, the one she lost in the fields years prior as she expelled a flood of blood and tissue into the indifferent earth. It could have been due to the ceaseless labor, the inadequate nutrition, or simply the cruel twist of fate. Almost 1 out of 3 pregnancies concluded in such a manner, yet life continued unabated, as unforgiving and relentless as the cyclical seasons. As Teko bows her head over her bowl, a few words of Buddhist prayer forming in her mind, a sudden movement from within prompts a gasp. The child is alive, eager for its own entry into the world. She gently rubs her swollen abdomen, attempting to calm the active spirit inside her. Whether a boy or girl, samurai or peasant, its existence will be shaped by the same unyielding forces that bind her own life: tradition, responsibility, and relentless toil. The feudal system perpetuates itself, binding each new generation to the well-trodden paths of the past. For the women of Teko's village and countless others like her across Japan, their personal lives are overshadowed by the larger necessity to bear children, maintain the household flames, and contribute to the rice supplies that nourish the nation. Confronted with such unyielding gender expectations, their aspirations and desires seem as fleeting as tendrils of smoke rising from a cooking flame, destined to disappear. As her family concludes their meal in the traditional quiet, Teo collects the empty bowls with a heavy sigh. The baby has settled down, yet the dull throb in her lower back lingers, a physical reminder of the relentless toil that defines her life. She indulges in the briefest daydream, picturing a life liberated from the unending cycle of pregnancy and labor. Yet, these thoughts are swiftly dismissed, replaced by a swell of guilt. To long for something beyond her assigned role feels like a betrayal, an abandonment of the duties instilled in her since infancy. She is a wife, a mother, a daughter-in-law. Her own wishes hold no significance. Harmony and submission, the twin ideals of an exemplary woman, have been ingrained in her core. With a moment's resolve, Teo rises from the table, feeling the weight of the child within her shift. Her husband and sons have already retired to their sleeping quarters, leaving the women to complete the tidying up. She passes a stack of bowls to her eldest daughter, who, at just 9, is already adept in the skills of homemaking. The girl's expression is serious as she fulfills her responsibilities, showing little sign of youthful defiance. Teo understands that one day her daughter will find herself in the same situation, a baby on her back, another in her womb, her feet perpetually stained from the rice paddies. It is the only future Teo can envision for her child, the sole path allowed by their rigidly hierarchical society. The thought evokes a pang of sadness but no true astonishment. As the last flickers of firelight vanish and the oppressive darkness envelops her, Teo lowers herself onto her thin mattress, settling her sore body into a reclined position. She gazes up at the thatched ceiling, barely discernible in the dim light. Tomorrow will mirror today just as every other day before it. An unending cycle of sowing and reaping, washing and repairing, bringing forth life and saying farewell. For women in feudal Japan, there exists no reprieve, no avenue for escape from the restrictive boundaries of their expected roles. The seasons may change and years may go by, yet the cadence of their existence remains as constant as the ocean's tide. Tiao closes her eyes, burdened by the weight of countless generations. In those fleeting moments before slumber overtakes her, she silently utters a hopeless prayer, not for her own sake, but for the future generations of women, wishing for them a life that transcends the fields and hearths, a life they can claim as their own. Yet, such reflections are ephemeral, as insubstantial as the wisps of smoke currently rising from the smouldering coals, dispersing into the humid night sky. Teo's final awareness is of the gentle movement of the child within her, an indication of her inescapable fate. She surrenders to sleep, her thoughts already shifting to the duties awaiting her with the first light of dawn. This is but a glimpse into the existence of one peasant woman, a single thread in the vast fabric of feudal Japanese society. However, it is a thread that endlessly reappears, a pattern of relentless labor and female subordination that endures through generations and across social strata. From the most humble villages to the grandest castles, the women of this time are constrained by identical rigid expectations, similar narrowly defined roles. To be born female in feudal Japan meant entering a life of servitude and sacrifice with scant hope for independence or self-direction. The burdens of tradition and the unyielding hierarchy of the feudal system combined to forge an existence of persistent struggle for women in all social classes. Whether toiling in the fields or attending to their samurai husbands' needs, their lives were characterized by duty and submission, with their personal identities overshadowed by the larger demands of family and society. It's a harsh and unyielding depiction, a reality in which even the most fundamental rights and freedoms are stripped from half the population simply because of their gender. Yet, amidst these stifling limitations, some women manage to establish a degree of autonomy and influence, subtly challenging the strict conventions of their culture in remarkable ways. Within the esteemed corridors of the samurai and the secluded rooms of the imperial court, a select few extraordinary women made their presence felt in history, exercising their power and shaping significant events with their intelligence, creativity, and unyielding determination. These narratives pierce through the dull fabric of female oppression, revealing sparks of hope in an otherwise grim and suffocating environment. As the centuries passed and Japan gradually moved beyond its feudal origins, beginning its tentative voyage towards modernity, the impact of these remarkable women persisted, motivating future generations to question established norms and advocate for a brighter future. Unfortunately for Teko and her many sisters enduring similar hardships, such transformation would come too late, their lives forever constrained by the rigid conventions of a society that regarded them merely as chattels and childbearers. As we navigate the complex and convoluted journey of Japanese history, it becomes impossible to overlook the pivotal role women played in shaping its trajectory, even while they were relegated to the periphery and stripped of essential rights and freedoms. Their experiences embody a story of resilience and quiet determination against daunting challenges, a celebration of the unyielding strength of the human spirit amidst severe oppression. Thus, we bid farewell to Teko as she sinks into her dreamless sleep, her body heavy with the burden of the unborn child and the weight of centuries of tradition resting upon her like a shackle. In the distance, the first gentle light of dawn begins to appear on the horizon, signaling the commencement of yet another day filled with endless labor and silent perseverance. For women in feudal Japan, life was an unending cycle, a lineage of suffering and subjugation that resonates through history. Yet, even amidst such relentless challenges, their spirits remained resilient, their narratives longing to be expressed. Through sharing their stories, we may illuminate the shadowy recesses of history and pay tribute to the countless unnamed women who gracefully endured the injustices of their society. Though the passage of time may render their voices hushed, their experiences are indelibly woven into the tapestry of Japan's history and present. As we prepare to sleep, Teko's tale envelops us like a soothing lullaby, instilling within us a renewed recognition of the trials and sacrifices made by the women who preceded us, along with a deeper comprehension of the forces that molded their lives and environments. In that tranquil moment between consciousness and dreams, we can almost discern the soft murmur of their voices, a spectral choir of mothers and daughters, wives and concubines, nuns and courtesans. They reach out to us through the ages, their words serving as a testament to the tenacity and unwavering spirit of the women who lived, loved, and toiled in the shadow of feudal Japan. As we finally yield to the comforting embrace of sleep, our minds flooded with vivid images of rice paddies, cramped dwellings, elegant tea houses, and austere temples, we carry the weight of their narratives, a reminder of the enduring power of human experience to rise above even the harshest conditions. The women of feudal Japan may no longer be with us, but their legacy persists, a proof of the unbreakable bonds of sisterhood and the indomitable strength of the feminine spirit. And with the gentle flow of this last reflection, we slip into the welcoming darkness, our dreams intertwined with the ethereal echoes of their timeless stories. Let us envision the journey of a woman who navigated her entire life within this feudal setting. What aspirations and challenges accompanied her through the years? What simple pleasures and harsh truths filled her days? Our woman's narrative commenced like many others in feudal Japan, marked by disappointment right from her birth. It was the early 1500s, and her farming family had already welcomed 2 daughters. They had hoped for a son this time to inherit their modest piece of land and carry on the family lineage. Instead, the midwife handed the weary mother a small, squirming girl. They named the infant Aki and prepared themselves to raise yet another daughter. Like in many struggling households, Aki's early years were fleeting. She was too young to recall her grandmother's complaints about yet another mouth to feed. However, she grew up observing the weariness in her mother's eyes and felt like a burden. By the age of 5, she had already taken on the responsibility of caring for her infant brother, who was the family's pride and joy. Aki changed his diapers, sang him lullabies, and envied him as he toddled after their father in the fields. Those same fields consumed the bulk of Aki's days. She learned to plant rice seedlings in neatly arranged rows, bending her back under the scorching sun for hours. A curious and sharp-minded girl, Aki bombarded her father and grandfather with questions as they labored. Why do we cultivate this kind of rice? How do the daimyo lords determine our taxes? What lies beyond the mountains surrounding their village? Yet her inquisitiveness was typically met with grunts, dismissive gestures, or admonitions to concentrate on her chores. Aki's quick intellect was often viewed as more of a hindrance than an advantage for a peasant girl. It was her mother and grandmother's role to prepare her in the domestic skills expected of a future wife: cooking, cleaning, sewing, and weaving. Each day, Aki watched her mother grind barley, fetch water, repair clothing, and stir the pot of millet porridge over their hearth, a baby strapped to her back. Rarely did she witness her mother take a moment to sit or relax. Around the age of 6, Aki began to accompany her sisters in these everyday household tasks. Their hands became rough and calloused from the relentless labor of handling farm implements, stirring food, and cleaning floors. Aki yearned for the days of carefree play in the rice paddies with her brother and his companions, flying kites and capturing crickets. Now she was learning the art of servitude, striving to be as quiet and efficient as her mother. The nearby Buddhist temple, her sole haven apart from the fields, preached that women's suffering in this life came as retribution for sins committed in previous lives. Only men could delve into the study of the sutras. Each year, one of Aki's few sources of joy was the village Matsuri festival. She delighted in the vibrant banners dancing in the wind from bamboo poles alongside the troupe of musicians and acrobats showcasing their talents in the square. Aki wished she could play the drums and flutes herself or learn the elegant dances, but girls were typically discouraged from engaging with the male performers. Thus, she settled for clapping along to the music and savoring a few mouthfuls of dango dumplings. Those fleeting moments of festivity provided a burst of energy to help her endure the long days of toil. As Aki approached her teenage years, her mother began to scrutinize her, assessing if she was prepared for marriage. A sense of dread filled Aki when she overheard her father conferring with the village matchmaker. She understood that marriage would mean bidding farewell to her family forever to join her husband's household. The very definition of yomi, or wife, indicated a woman who resides elsewhere. Aki silently hoped for a gentle spouse rather than one who might inflict pain upon her like some men did to their wives. She had no say in her destiny. At the age of 15, she learned that arrangements had been made for her to wed the second son of a more prosperous farming family from 2 villages away. She had met her fiancé a single time before their wedding during the formal matchmaking event. They sat facing one another, sipping sake and avoiding each other's gaze. He was a complete stranger to her. Aki speculated if he felt similarly ensnared by familial obligations and dreamed of a different life. The wedding rushed by in a haze of unfamiliar faces and 2 constricting wedding kimonos. Aki was now officially a yomi, with her primary responsibility being to cater to her new family's needs. From dawn until dusk, she served the whims of her stern father-in-law and critical mother-in-law, tending to their every demand. Her husband, appearing timid and subdued himself, spent his days laboring in the fields. At night, he would visit her quarters to fulfill his marital obligations. Aki lay staring at the ceiling, attempting to divert her thoughts elsewhere. It didn't take long for her to miss her menstrual cycle and realize she was expecting. When her healthy son arrived, crying loudly, the family rejoiced, and Aki experienced a wave of love and pride. Yet her mother-in-law swiftly took charge, whisking the newborn away to be nursed by his grandmother, following tradition. As she recuperated from childbirth, Aki ached for her baby, her breasts heavy with milk. The separation felt like a part of her was lost. As the years progressed and more children followed, including 3 daughters, Aki gradually accepted her fate. She recognized she was luckier than many other women. The harvests were bountiful, her husband was not unkind, and most days they managed to feed their children. Aki's life revolved around serving others from sunrise to sunset. She fetched water from the village well, pounded rice cakes until her arms were sore, and sewed indigo-dyed cotton garments for the family. During rare breaks, she would catch up on local gossip with other wives and slyly give her children sweets when the grandparents weren't watching. Aki found comfort in small joys and the rituals marking the seasons. Cherry blossom picnics in spring, summer's star festival, fall harvest celebrations, and winter's New Year dishes. She preserved stories and wisdom to pass down to her daughters, fully aware of the limitations they would encounter in this society. They could not inherit property, learn to read, or dictate their own paths, but they could discover significance in small freedoms and the solidarity among women. Aki anxiously worried about her daughters' marriages and their well-being as grey strands appeared in her hair, and her own union settled into a comfortable silence. By the age of 50, Aki was labeled an old woman. She had been fortunate enough to survive the perils of several childbirths. Now a widow, she finally held some influence within the family as a mother-in-law. Yet her body had become frail after years of hard work. Aki's aching joints and clouded vision often led her thoughts to reflect inward. She frequently contemplated the Pure Land, the Buddhist paradise thought to await her. Chanting the Nambutsu prayer on her dew beads provided her with some solace. When clan warfare reached their village, forcing her to escape with her children and grandchildren, Aki realized just how fragile their existence had always been. She began to rely on her son and grandson for her survival. They worked to resettle and rebuild, replanting their fields and mending thatched roofs. Aki did not live to see her youngest granddaughter, a spirited and headstrong girl, secretly learn to write from a sympathetic monk, but she would have recognized that fiery curiosity, that longing for a more expansive life. Aki's narrative was one of quiet resilience amid a lifetime of obligations and hardship, interwoven with fleeting moments of grace, laughter, and love that shone through the struggles. Like many common women of her time, she left no record of her inner thoughts. However, she was part of a lineage of mothers and daughters stretching back through the ages in feudal Japan, bending like reeds without ever breaking. Over the years, some of these women found subtle ways to push against their limitations. A few openly defied the norms, taking up arms or shaving their heads to enter monasteries. Others silently challenged expectations as artists, writers, merchants, and innkeepers. In their quiet ways, they influenced societal consciousness and created a legacy of resilience. Aki could not have fathomed the vastly different existence of an ordinary Japanese woman today. One who possessed education, career options, and choices that were unimaginable in her time, yet she, along with countless overlooked foremothers, made those possibilities a reality through their quiet bravery. Reflecting on their narratives, we might tap into some of that resilience during our own difficult times and sow the seeds for change in our own ways. The river of history continues to flow, carrying us all along its course, as women keep reshaping it in both significant and subtle manners. Existence in feudal Japan was a continual fight for survival, particularly for women. While men encountered their own set of struggles, the burdens of societal norms, rigid gender expectations, and a lack of personal liberties created an especially challenging reality for females across all strata of society. From the moment a girl entered the world, her life was influenced by the perception that she held less value than a male counterpart. Many families yearned for sons to carry on the family name and to provide for them in their later years. Daughters were often regarded as a liability, merely another additional mouth to feed until they could be married off. In certain instances, families with an excess of daughters might even resort to the tragic measure of female infanticide, although this practice was beginning to decline by the feudal period. For those girls who survived, their upbringing was centered on grooming them for their future roles as wives and mothers. From a young age, girls were instructed to be submissive, compliant, and proficient in domestic chores like cooking, cleaning, and sewing. They were expected to be gentle-spoken, modest, and to consistently yield to the men in their lives. There were a few rare cases of girls who managed to receive a more comprehensive education, typically due to their connections to wealthy or influential families. A notable example is Murasaki Shikibu, who lived during the late 10th and early 11th centuries. She was afforded an education that was generally reserved for males studying Chinese classics and Buddhist texts. Murasaki later became a lady-in-waiting at the imperial court and authored The Tale of Genji, often regarded as the first novel in history and a cornerstone of Japanese literature. However, for most girls, the chance to learn and broaden their horizons remained unattainable. As they entered their teenage years, typically between 13 and 16, they were viewed as ready for marriage. These unions were predominantly arranged by their parents, leaving little to no say for the young brides themselves. The intention behind these marriages was not romance or individual fulfillment, but rather to produce heirs and strengthen familial bonds or create political alliances. A poignant example is the tale of Tokugawa Masako, who was wed at just 15 to the influential feudal lord Tokugawa Ieyasu. Masako was the offspring of a rival clan leader, and the marriage aimed to foster peace between the two feuding families. Unfortunately for Masako, this meant being uprooted from her home and thrust into a new life where she was expected to ensure a male heir for her husband. The pressure on young brides like Masako was immense, as failing to deliver a son could result in shame, scorn, or even divorce. After marriage, a woman's existence revolved around her responsibilities as a wife and mother. She was anticipated to move into her husband's family residence, where she had to navigate the intricate relationships with her new in-laws. Her main duty was to bear children, particularly sons, and to rear them according to the strict societal expectations of the time. Women were mostly confined to home life, dedicating their days to cooking, cleaning, sewing, and attending to the needs of their spouses and children. The difficulties of motherhood in feudal Japan were considerable. With restricted access to medical care and proper nutrition, pregnancy and childbirth posed significant risks. Many women perished during childbirth, and the rates of infant mortality were alarmingly high. Those who managed to survive often faced the challenge of undergoing numerous pregnancies throughout their lives, as having large families was commonplace. For women from lower socio-economic backgrounds, such as peasants, the demands of motherhood were even greater. Not only were they responsible for nurturing their children and maintaining the household, but they were also expected to labor side by side with their husbands in the fields, planting and gathering crops essential for their family's survival. The narrative of Nanotiko, a peasant woman from the early Edo period, exemplifies the hardships of this existence. Tiko raised 6 children while tirelessly toiling on her family's farm, rarely finding time for rest or respite from the relentless grind of daily life. It's important to note that women's experiences in feudal Japan were not uniform. Much was contingent on their social class and status. The stringent hierarchy of feudal society imposed limitations on social mobility, and women were constrained by strict laws and customs that governed every aspect of their existence, from the clothing they could wear to the food they were permitted to consume. At the lowest rung of this social hierarchy were the peasant women, who constituted the overwhelming majority of the population. They endured harsh lives filled with manual work, laboring in the fields alongside their husbands and children to cultivate the rice and other crops that sustained the nation. Their lives were devoid of many comforts and leisure activities, often leaving them vulnerable to the whims of their local lords and samurai. Slightly above the peasantry were the merchant and artisan classes, which began to flourish during the latter part of the feudal period. Women in these households may have experienced a bit more economic stability and had some access to education, especially if they participated in the family business, yet they remained subject to the same rigid gender norms and expectations characteristic of other social classes. The samurai class, the warrior elite of feudal Japan, had its own distinct challenges and opportunities for women. Samurai women were anticipated to exemplify the same values of loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice as their male peers. Many underwent training in martial arts and were expected to protect their families and homes when the situation called for it. Certain samurai women gained recognition as formidable warriors themselves, such as Nanoteko, who fought valiantly and perished in the Battle of Aizu during the Meiji Restoration. Nevertheless, even among the samurai class, women faced significant limitations dictated by their gender. They were often expected to marry for the benefit of their family and clan, tasked with bearing male heirs to uphold the family name, all while navigating the intricate political landscape of the samurai world, where loyalties and alliances were perpetually evolving. A notable figure among samurai women was Hojo Masako, who thrived in the 13th century. Married to the regent Hojo Tokimasa, she emerged as a significant political force following his death. Though deeply devoted to Buddhism, earning her the nickname the Nun Shogun, she was also recognized for her astute political skills. Masako tirelessly worked behind the scenes to safeguard the interests of her clan and preserve their influence and power. At the upper echelons of the social hierarchy were noble women, the wives and daughters of the daimyo lords and the imperial family. These women enjoyed lives of luxury and privilege, with access to the finest clothing, food, and entertainment. Yet they, too, faced the strictest control in all of feudal society. Noble women were expected to serve as paragons of feminine grace and beauty, excelling in music, poetry, and calligraphy. Rarely seen in public, they spent most of their lives within the secluded quarters of their families' castles and estates. Their marriages were meticulously arranged to forge political connections and ensure the continuity of noble lineages. Even with the stringent limitations imposed on women during feudal Japan, a few individuals succeeded in breaking free from societal expectations and leaving their imprint on history. These women were exceptional. They challenged the status quo and discovered avenues to express themselves and assert their autonomy in a culture that offered scant opportunities for such independence. One notable figure was Yumo no Akuni, a shrine maiden from the early 17th century. Akuni is recognized as the originator of kabuki theater, an art form that began as a bawdy and satirical style of dance and performance. Akuni and her troupe of female artists donned men's attire to perform dances and skits that lampooned the samurai class and the social conventions of their time. Kabuki rapidly gained popularity among merchants and artisans who appreciated its irreverent humor and vibrant flair. Another extraordinary woman who defied the gender norms of her era was Machisuki Chiyomi, a noblewoman from the 16th century. Chiyomi, who was married to a formidable samurai lord, was not only a potent warrior but also a shrewd strategist. She is renowned for forming an all-female group of ninjas who acted as spies and assassins for her husband's clan. These kunoichi were adept in espionage, disguise, and combat, and played a pivotal role in gathering intelligence and executing clandestine operations. Yet women like Okuni and Kiyomi were rare anomalies in a society that imposed numerous restrictions on women's lives. For most women in feudal Japan, existence was a continuous struggle against the confines enforced upon them by their gender and social class. One of the clearest illustrations of these constraints can be found in the legal framework of feudal Japan, which afforded women minimal rights and regarded them as subordinate to men in nearly every aspect. Women were prohibited from owning property, inheriting wealth, or even selecting their own spouses. They were subjected to a rigid set of rules that dictated every facet of their conduct, influencing everything from their attire to their manner of speaking. A glaring illustration of the legal disparities experienced by women was the custom known as katsugo. This involved punishment whereby a woman could be beaten or even killed by her husband or father for perceived transgressions such as infidelity or disobedience. Conversely, men enjoyed the freedom to take concubines and engage in extramarital relationships without worrying about any legal ramifications. The absence of substantial legal safeguards for women rendered them susceptible to mistreatment and exploitation by men. Divorce was permissible only in instances where the wife was considered at fault, and even then the process was heavily slanted in favor of the husband. Women who found themselves divorced or widowed frequently lacked the means to sustain themselves and had to rely on the goodwill of male relatives or resort to prostitution for survival. Yet amid these harsh truths, there were faint rays of hope for women living in feudal Japan. Certain lords and samurai acknowledged the unfairness of the existing system and made efforts to safeguard the women within their jurisdiction. A notable figure was the daimyo Wasugi Kenshin, who governed a province in the 16th century. Kenshin was recognized for his progressive perspectives regarding women, which included outlawing the practice of katsugo and facilitating education and training opportunities for girls under his rule. Nonetheless, these accomplishments were mere small victories in a society largely opposed to the welfare of women. The dominant beliefs about gender were deeply embedded in the culture and reinforced by the predominant religious and philosophical ideologies of the time. Buddhism, which made its way to Japan in the 6th century, propagated the notion that women were inherently inferior to men and more susceptible to sin and desire. Women were viewed as obstacles to men's spiritual growth, and numerous Buddhist texts cautioned against the hazards of attachment to women. Shinto, Japan's indigenous faith, presented a nuanced and often conflicting perspective towards women. On one side, Shinto legends exalted formidable female deities, such as Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and portrayed women's bodies as revered temples. Conversely, Shinto doctrines also upheld the notion that women were spiritually impure, especially during menstruation and childbirth. These religious and societal beliefs significantly influenced the treatment of women in feudal culture, serving to rationalize the rigid social hierarchy and the restrictions imposed on women's freedoms and prospects. They fostered an environment of shame and secrecy surrounding women's bodies and experiences. A particularly insidious illustration of this was the practice of kegare, or spiritual pollution. Women were deemed innately unclean, particularly during their menstrual cycles and post-childbirth. During these periods, they were often confined to separate quarters and barred from engaging in religious ceremonies or entering sacred spaces. This belief in women's impurity also had tangible implications for their everyday lives. Women faced prohibitions on certain jobs like brewing sake or preparing food for religious events due to fears that their impurity would taint these products. In extreme cases, women were even held responsible for natural calamities or crop failures, as their perceived impurity was believed to provoke the gods. Nevertheless, amidst these entrenched beliefs, some women in feudal Japan sought ways to resist the established norms and affirm their spiritual agency. One notable figure was Empress Komyo, who reigned in the 8th century. A devout Buddhist, Komyo utilized her role as empress to advocate for the religion and to establish temples and nunneries across Japan. She took a particular interest in the welfare of women and the impoverished. She founded several charitable hospitals and shelters for women escaping abusive relationships or those who had become widowed or abandoned. Additionally, she contributed significant financial support to women who had chosen to be Buddhist nuns and urged other noble women to follow suit. Nevertheless, even a woman as influential as Ko could not entirely evade the restrictions imposed on her due to her gender. She was still required to fulfill her obligations as a spouse and parent, facing criticism and resistance from various factions for her religious and philanthropic efforts. As women aged, especially when they reached their 40s or 50s, they encountered new hurdles and limitations. In feudal society, a woman of that age was regarded as elderly, leading to a shift in her role. Many female peasants who had toiled in the fields alongside their husbands and children often found themselves widowed and unsupported in their later years. They might have to depend on their sons or other male relatives for sustenance or resort to begging for survival. Women from the merchant class, who spent their lives assisting in their husbands' shops and enterprises, faced similar difficulties. If their husbands passed away before them, they could be left without any source of income or means of support. While some widows managed to keep the family business running, they frequently encountered discrimination and challenges from male competitors and customers. For samurai women, aging brought its own unique set of challenges. Many outlived their husbands, who often died young in battle or due to illness. These women were expected to uphold family honor and perpetuate the samurai legacy even while mourning the deaths of their husbands and sons. One such figure was Hojo Masako, the nun shogun who exercised significant political influence throughout her life. After her husband's death, Masako became a Buddhist nun and retired to a temple. Yet she remained active in the political scheming of her time, leveraging her power to safeguard her clan's interests. For certain women, the later phases of life brought with them newfound freedoms and possibilities. They could choose to become nuns or immerse themselves in spiritual practices, finding comfort and purpose through their faith. They might embark on pilgrimages to sacred locations or fund the building of temples and shrines. However, for numerous women, the twilight years were marked by solitude, struggle, and reliance on others. They had to depend on the kindness of male relatives or the generosity of strangers for their survival. Additionally, they faced the reality of illness and physical decline without access to modern healthcare or support. Reflecting on the experiences of women in feudal Japan reveals the immense obstacles and trials they endured. Since birth, they were perceived as lesser than men and stripped of the fundamental rights and freedoms many of us enjoy today. Society expected them to be compliant, meek, and submissive, prioritizing the needs of their husbands and families over their own. Nevertheless, in spite of these formidable challenges, some women found ways to resist and assert their own agency, both in minor and significant manners. There were those who emerged as warriors, artists, and leaders, challenging societal norms and striving for improved lives for themselves and their fellow women. While these women were exceptions to the rule, they illustrate the remarkable resilience and tenacity of the human spirit. They remind us that even during the bleakest periods, there are always individuals who stand for justice and equality, unwilling to be silenced or pushed aside. As we reflect on the journeys of these women, we can also recognize the lingering effects of their struggles today. Many of the gender-related attitudes and beliefs that existed in feudal Japan have continued to persist in varying forms into contemporary society. Women in Japan and across the globe continue to encounter discrimination, violence, and inequalities. The battle for gender justice is still ongoing. However, by reflecting on the stories of the women who preceded us, we can draw strength and inspiration from their bravery and resilience. We can pay tribute to their legacies by persisting in the work they initiated, striving for a world where everyone, irrespective of gender, is treated with honor and respect. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of women in feudal Japan, let us take a moment to envision ourselves in their circumstances. Let's picture the everyday challenges and sacrifices they endured, alongside their moments of happiness and sorrow, the aspirations and hopes they cherished within. Moreover, let us acknowledge that each of these women represented a unique and valuable individual, bearing her own story and offering her own contributions to history. We honor their memory by sharing their narratives, keeping their legacies vibrant, and campaigning for a society where every woman can enjoy a life characterized by dignity, freedom, and fulfillment. As we've observed, a woman's existence in feudal Japan was intricately influenced from birth by rigid gender roles and societal expectations. For a girl born into a samurai family, her future would be inextricably linked to the fortunes and dealings of her clan. An example of this is Hojo Masako, born in 1156 into the influential Hojo clan. Being the daughter of a wealthy samurai lord afforded Masako a life of privilege, yet she also endured considerable pressure to conform to the societal ideal of a proper samurai wife. She would eventually emerge as a significant political figure in the turbulent landscape of feudal Japan. Masako's life took a decisive turn when, at the age of 15, she was wed to the young shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo. This union was a strategic alliance formed to strengthen the ties between the Minamoto and Hojo clans. Maso dutifully integrated into her husband's household, assuming the responsibilities of a samurai wife overseeing the estate, hosting visitors, and most crucially, producing an heir to uphold the family legacy. As the spouse of a driven warlord, Masako found herself amidst the fierce power struggles of feudal Japan. Upon her husband Yoritomo's establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1192, Masako emerged as the most influential woman in the country. She accepted this position, acting as a reliable counselor to Yoritomo and aiding in the administration of his territory. Yet, Masako faced her true challenge following Yoritomo's unexpected passing in 1199. With her two young sons poised to inherit the shogunate, she fiercely defended their rights against competing clans. By strategically placing her father and other male relatives in critical government roles, she secured the Hojo clan's supremacy. After her eldest son proved an ineffective leader and was murdered, Masako positioned her younger son as a puppet shogun, ruling through him. For over 2 decades, she was the unofficial ruler of Japan, wielding authority over all military and political decisions. She navigated the treacherous landscape of feudal power dynamics with both finesse and determination, neutralizing adversaries and quelling uprisings. Masako's narrative illustrates how some remarkable women managed to exert influence in feudal Japan, even while bound by their roles as wives and mothers. Yet even someone as formidable as Masako could not escape the constraints and tragedies of her era. She endured the loss of multiple children and grandchildren, some due to assassination. And despite her political savvy, she was always required to operate through male figures, first her husband, then her sons. In her later years, Masako took the tonsure and embraced life as a Buddhist nun, a common path for noble women as they aged. Although she retired to a temple, she continued to subtly influence Hojo clan affairs from behind the scenes until her passing at the age of 69. Her legacy is that of a remarkable woman who fiercely grasped and wielded power in a male-dominated society, leaving a lasting impact on Japanese history. In contrast, the lives of everyday women in feudal Japan were far more constrained and vulnerable than that of a noblewoman like Masako. Peasant women faced a reality filled with intense labor and child-rearing, with scant comforts or opportunities for respite. Picture a farmer's wife in a small rural community during the 14th century. Let's name her May. May most likely married in her teenage years to a husband selected by her father. Upon becoming a bride, she would have relocated to her husband's family home, taking on the lowest rank among the women in the household. Her daily existence was marked by a relentless cycle of housework and farming tasks. She arose before dawn to prepare the morning meal, served her husband and in-laws first, and only consumed what was left. May would spend her days sowing seeds and pulling weeds in the fields, caring for the vegetable patch, mending garments, cleaning and fetching water. In the evenings, she prepared and served dinner, possibly taking time to spin or sew by lamplight before retiring. Despite the burdens of her routine, May's foremost duty was to bear children, especially sons, to inherit the family land. She would likely give birth every 2 to 3 years with little reprieve from her responsibilities. Many of her infants probably did not survive the trials of infancy due to insufficient nutrition or illness. May herself might have faced an early death due to complications from childbirth or the relentless physical demands of her life. If she lived into old age, May's prospects were bleak, particularly if widowed and without sons to care for her. She might have hoped that her decades of hard work would elevate her status within the household to that of a mother-in-law. Yet, she would remain reliant on her male relatives. May and millions of peasant women like her formed the largely unrecognized and unsung foundation of feudal Japanese society. While the achievements of male samurai and shoguns received widespread recognition, It was the arduous work of peasant women that upheld the country's agrarian economy. Their hardships and sacrifices were often overlooked in a societal framework that viewed women's subjugation as inherent and necessary. Not all women in feudal Japan fit into the roles of wives and mothers. Some carved out alternative lives beyond traditional family structures, although these choices were not without their own challenges. In the pleasure districts of cities like Edo and Kyoto, certain women became courtesans, entertainers, and geisha. Although this line of work afforded more autonomy than marriage, it still operated within a rigid hierarchy dominated by men. Successful courtesans might gain a level of influence by alluring and advising affluent clients, yet they remained susceptible to exploitation and mistreatment. Other women chose a spiritual path, entering Buddhist temples as nuns, which represented one of the limited avenues away from matrimony. In this role, they could focus on learning and spiritual endeavors, with some attaining respect as educators or abbesses. However, these women had to sever ties with their families, shave their heads, and endure the stigma of celibacy in a culture that valued fertility. A few extraordinary women even made notable contributions in the male-centered world of the arts. Murasaki Shikibu, born around 978, rose to become a lady-in-waiting at the imperial court and penned The Tale of Genji, known as the world's first novel. Her poetic narrative of courtly life provided a unique female viewpoint on the intrigues and aesthetics of the Heian era's elite. Other women also contributed to literature, poetry, calligraphy, and music. For example, 12th century poet Akazomi Emon excelled in the waka form and taught fellow women writers. However, these artistic endeavors still unfolded within the limitations of court life, where women's voices were frequently sidelined or appropriated by men. Nonetheless, they reflect the unyielding creativity and intellect of women who discovered ways to articulate their identities within stifling restrictions. As the feudal period transitioned into the Edo era, the circumstances for women tightened even further. Neo-Confucian principles emphasizing rigid gender roles and female subservience took precedence. The model of the ideal wife and wise mother, entirely dedicated to the service of her husband and children, became more deeply ingrained. Ironically, economic expansion and urban development provided a somewhat easier existence for many women, alleviating some material hardships. However, this was counterbalanced by the entrenchment of a patriarchal system that increasingly limited women to the narrowest confines and the most burdensome expectations. By the late 19th century, as the modern age approached, Japanese women would confront a legacy of subordination and restrictions that had become, in many respects, more rigidly defined than ever. The journey toward enhanced freedoms and gender equity would be long and challenging, supported by the resilience of countless women who navigated a male-dominated environment. Thus, as we reflect on the remarkable obstacles faced by women in feudal Japan, we should take a moment to recognize their strength, ingenuity, and dignity in a time that offered them so little. From the unrecognized peasant wife to the powerful noblewoman, from the reclusive nun to the passionate artist, each woman managed to maneuver through the harsh limitations of her situation in her unique manner. Their narratives merit remembrance and respect, not merely as a somber chapter in history, but as a tribute to the enduring spirit of women throughout time. Although their voices were long silenced, the women of feudal Japan resonate today, representing the ongoing struggle for autonomy, respect, and self-determination. By engaging with their experiences, we honor their memories and carry forth their legacy of resilience. As we settle in for the night, let us take a moment to reflect on the extraordinary women from a bygone era who faced tremendous adversity, yet still managed to leave an enduring legacy in history. May their resilience and elegance continue to motivate us as we navigate our own challenges and victories throughout time. Through their determination and tenacity, some women succeeded in crafting meaningful existences and even wielding influence within the restrictive patriarchal structures of feudal Japan. One such remarkable individual was Hojo Masako, who was born in 1156 into a prominent samurai lineage. At 13, she was married to the ascending warlord Minamoto no Yoritomo as part of a political arrangement befitting her class and time. In her role as Yoritomo's wife, Masako was expected to support her spouse, produce heirs, and efficiently oversee household duties. She accomplished all of this and more, swiftly demonstrating her intelligence, ingenuity, and political savvy. While Yoritomo engaged in military endeavors, Masako capably governed in his absence, providing counsel on strategies for their clan and even mobilizing defense forces when necessary. Her sharp insight and capabilities earned her the title of the Nun Shogun, as she adeptly navigated the responsibilities of a samurai wife, mother, and key power within the political sphere. In 1299, following Yoritomo's unexpected death, Masako took immediate action to safeguard her family's interests and her young sons. Recognizing the dangers that a widow might face, she promptly took religious vows and became a Buddhist nun, granting her a degree of protection and authority from which she could exercise power and defend her family against threats. For the ensuing 2 decades, through a blend of diplomacy, strategic maneuvering, and unyielding determination, Masako guided the Hojo clan through perilous political waters. She negotiated important alliances, outwitted conniving rivals, and secured her son's position as shogun, ruler of all Japan, in title, if not always in practice. Indeed, Masako's steady leadership ensured that the Hojo Regency maintained its status as a dominant power for generations to come. Even the most remarkable woman of her time could not fully evade the hardships and tribulations that characterized the lives of many women in feudal Japan. Only one frail son of Masako's children survived to adulthood, and their relationship was fraught with tension as she endeavored to mold him into a strong leader, wrestling with his temperament. Tragically, he passed away young, leaving the Hojo Regency to more distant family members. No matter how much she strategized, Masako was unable to transcend the era's laws regarding male primogeniture. As she aged, after dedicating her life to preserving her family's legacy, Masako slowly withdrew from worldly matters. She secluded herself in a small hermitage, devoting her later years to Buddhist practices, perhaps seeking in faith the tranquility and refuge that eluded her amidst the turbulent male-dominated society. The precise date of her passing remains uncertain, but most accounts suggest she lived into her 70s, an impressive longevity for that era. The narrative of Hojo Masako exemplifies both the confines and the possibilities that came with being a noble woman in feudal Japan. Through marriage and birth circumstances, she ascended to the highest realms of power. Her sharp intellect and relentless resolve enabled her to grasp every chance to influence her destiny and that of her clan. Yet, even such a remarkably skilled noblewoman could not completely liberate herself from the constraints of her gender. Despite her significant sway over political affairs, her fate ultimately relied on the men surrounding her, the husband she supported, the son she championed, the nephew destined to carry on her lineage. For every hard-earned success, the unyielding force of patriarchal dominance still guided her path. Masako's experience, portrayed on the broader canvas of history, resonates with the personal struggles of countless women from those distant times. Regardless of their social status, whether from samurai or peasant backgrounds, every woman had to navigate a world that provided her with limited choices and little control over her own destiny. From birth to death, she was subjected to the authority of fathers, husbands, and sons. Her worth was gauged by her usefulness to men. Consider perhaps a young peasant bride laboring alongside her husband in the rice fields from dawn until dusk, endlessly bearing child after child until the toll on her body became too much to bear. Think of a samurai widow striving to protect her deceased husband's meager stipend so she could provide for her children. Imagine a low-ranking concubine plotting to secure her place in a noble household, fearing banishment to survive on her own. In both significant and minor ways, every woman had to navigate her own journey through a labyrinth of obligations and societal expectations that surrounded her. Nonetheless, it would be a mistake to view these women solely as passive victims of their circumstances. Within the tight constraints of their assigned roles, they still discovered ways to build lives rich in meaning and purpose. They cultivated rice, produced silk, and nurtured children. They formed bonds of friendship, experienced love, and dealt with heartbreak. They prayed to the gods and Buddhas, seeking comfort and strength amid adversity. In the intricate fabric of their daily experiences made up of countless small joys and sorrows, these women quietly influenced the trajectory of history, even as it marginalized them. To be a woman in feudal Japan meant living in a realm that allowed little freedom or autonomy. It was a society characterized by rigid hierarchies and unwavering expectations, where a woman's value was determined by her compliance and reproductive capabilities. In this world, even the most intelligent and ambitious woman could only exert influence from behind closed doors, perpetually reliant on male whims. Yet, it was also a world where women managed to persevere and even flourish in the face of considerable opposition. Through their resilience, creativity, and steadfast strength, they made lasting contributions to the fabric of their society, even as their identities and achievements were often omitted from the historical narrative. As we reflect on the centuries gone by, it becomes straightforward to focus solely on the oppression and injustices that limited the lives of women from that era. Yet we should also acknowledge their humanity, resilience, and unyielding spirit despite the challenges they faced. Ultimately, their narrative transcends mere subjugation. It embodies survival, a tribute to the enduring strength of the human will to seek meaning and beauty even in the harshest of conditions. Let's not remember the women of feudal Japan merely as victims, but rather as the heroines of their own silent sagas. We must honor both their victories and struggles, their joys and sorrows, carrying their memories as a symbol of the unwavering resilience of the human spirit that persists and flourishes even in the bleakest of times. As we prepare for sleep, let us envision those women of the past who lived, loved, fought, and perished in a world so dissimilar to our own, yet deeply familiar in its fundamental humanity. Let their experiences reside in our hearts as a testament to the lasting strength and bravery of women throughout history. And may we take their memories forward into the new day, as a reminder that even amid the greatest challenges, the human spirit consistently finds a way to shine through. With the solidifying of the rigid hierarchy in feudal Japanese society, the position of women became increasingly subordinate. The deeply ingrained patriarchal system afforded women minimal rights, protections, or chances for self-determination, relegating their legal status to something hardly above that of property or livestock. They were first under the dominion of their fathers, then their husbands, and later their sons. From the moment they were born, girls were deemed less valuable than boys. Although the practice was already on the decline during the feudal period, the act of female infanticide or the killing of newborn girls still took place in some households, particularly among impoverished rural families unable to support additional children or who strongly desired a male heir. The ideal family structure was considered to consist of 3 daughters and 5 sons. Yet, even for girls who were welcomed into the world, a challenging journey awaited them. They were nurtured to be compliant, dutiful, and focused on household responsibilities in preparation for marriage, which was their overwhelmingly likely destiny. In contrast to their brothers, girls generally did not have the opportunity for formal education in literacy or academic disciplines. A prominent exception was Murasaki Shikibu, who was born into the cultured Fujiwara clan around 973 AD during the Han dynasty. She had the advantage of access to her scholarly father's library, where she delved into Chinese literature and developed a profound passion for writing and poetry. In a society that often discouraged women from reading for fear they might become impertinent, Murasaki's intellect was remarkably rare. Her literary abilities flourished at the imperial court, where she served as a lady-in-waiting. During the lengthy periods of leisure, Murasaki began to craft the expansive novel that would ultimately become her masterpiece, The Tale of Genji. The narrative follows the luminous Prince Genji and his numerous romantic escapades, serving as a clever and insightful critique of aristocratic society. Enriched with over 800 exquisite waka poems, this 54-chapter work is regarded as the world's first novel and a pinnacle of classical Japanese literature. Its psychological richness, vivid visual imagery, and bold exploration of love and sexuality all emerged from Murasaki's creative mind. Against all odds, she attained an educational level that equipped her with the skills and creativity to produce a timeless piece of art. Nevertheless, Murasaki's experience was an exception rather than a reflection of the norm for noble women, or certainly for those of lower social standing. There were limited alternatives to marriage. For peasant girls, this change could occur as early as 13 or 14. Even within some samurai and noble families, daughters were often wed in their mid-teens to strengthen political bonds. Marriage was less about romance and more about obligation and practicality. Parents arranged unions with careful consideration of social hierarchy, financial benefits, and relationships among extended families. A bride was expected to be a virgin, submissive, proficient in household duties, and ideally capable of bearing children. Imagine the anxiety a young girl must have experienced, barely out of childhood, leaving behind her familiar home to embark on a new life with her husband's family. There, her responsibilities included serving her in-laws and having as many children as possible, with immense pressure to quickly produce a male heir. Any issues with infertility were typically blamed on the woman. A bride who was unable to give birth to a son risked being replaced by another wife or a concubine. Take the example of Tokugawa Masako, who was born into a prominent samurai family in 607. At just 15, she was married to the second Tokugawa shogun, Hidetada, to secure her clan's position within the new regime her father had helped establish. Much was dependent on young Masako to ensure that an heir would be born for the shogunate. Luckily, shortly before her 18th birthday, she delivered a healthy boy, the future third shogun, Yamitsu. She would eventually bear Hidetada 5 additional children, solidifying her role as a significant political figure. Following her husband's death, Masako took on the title of Taito-queen and emerged as a crucial advisor to her son, the new shogun. As a powerful figure, Masako wielded considerable influence behind the scenes of the shogunate. She issued commands, met with officials, and intervened in disputes among rival factions. When a scandal threatened Yamitsu's line of succession, Masako swiftly took action to safeguard it. Her keen intuition and steadfast devotion to the Tokugawa clan positioned her as arguably the most formidable woman in Japan during that period. Yet, Masako's status at the top of feudal society was an exclusive realm, seldom experienced by other women. For the overwhelming majority, their adult lives centered solely on household responsibilities, leaving little room for anything beyond monotonous domesticity and motherhood. A woman's worth was predominantly assessed by her capacity to bear offspring, particularly sons to carry on the family lineage. Regular pregnancies were typical for married women in their reproductive years. However, lacking access to contemporary medical care, these frequent pregnancies took a significant toll. Childbirth complications ranked among the leading causes of mortality for women in feudal Japan. The average woman might anticipate having 5 or 6 children, yet high infant mortality rates lingered over them. Perhaps only half would reach the age of 5. The physical and emotional burdens of motherhood during this time were immense. The harsh realities of peasant women particularly cannot be overstated. Beyond their roles as mothers, lower-class women were expected to toil alongside their husbands in the rice fields, laboring for long hours to scrape together a meager livelihood. Their physically exhausting existence allowed little opportunity for rest or respite. Consider the life of a woman like Nano Teo, who was born into a farming household during the stable yet rigid Tokugawa era. From a tender age, Teo would have started working, tending to livestock, fetching water, weeding fields, processing crops, in addition to cooking, cleaning, sewing, and caring for her younger siblings. Quickly married off as a teenager to another agricultural family, her already strenuous workload would only escalate. Rising before dawn to tend the cooking fires, Teo's rough hands would prepare breakfast for her husband and in-laws before heading out to the fields. Waist-deep in muddy water, she would bend low to plant, weed, and harvest the main crop that sustained the household. Returning home exhausted and drenched, an unending list of household tasks awaited. Perhaps the only reprieve from Teo's relentless routine was the shared bath at day's end. In this haven for women, she could remove her sweat-stained garments and immerse herself in the comforting warmth of the local bathhouse. Surrounded by soothing steam, the farm wives could finally indulge in a moment of relaxation, sharing gossip, and temporarily escaping their worries before the cycle would start anew with the dawn. Year after year, through numerous pregnancies, Teo's resilient peasant body became her greatest asset, even as it gradually deteriorated under the relentless burden of labor and childbearing. If she reached old age, her gnarled hands and hunched back would narrate a tale of a lifetime of struggle, a narrative all too familiar for women of her status. Yet even women from more affluent backgrounds could not fully evade the restrictions imposed by their gender. In feudal Japan, social class was the primary factor shaping a woman's quality of life. However, strict regulations dictated the privileges designated to each social stratum. The style of their kimonos, the food in their kitchens, every detail was determined by a woman's rank. Sumptuary laws explicitly outlined what each level could wear, consume, and possess. For instance, only women from the imperial family were allowed to don silk robes featuring 5 layers. Ladies in waiting had to settle for 4 layers, while townswomen were restricted to cotton. These stringent rules made certain that women understood their position and rarely endeavored to transcend it. Still, every class faced its unique challenges and risks. As previously discussed, peasant women endured lives marked by grueling toil in the fields. Merchant wives had somewhat improved material conditions, yet they remained largely confined to domestic roles, supporting their husbands' businesses from behind the scenes. Even the greater comfort experienced by samurai and noblewomen came at the significant expense of autonomy. For daughters of the samurai class, a certain level of education was allowed, even anticipated. Many samurai girls learned how to read and write, typically receiving instruction at home. Some even received training in self-defense to safeguard the home while their male relatives were off at war. A fortunate few like Murasaki Shikibu were granted the chance to develop their intellectual abilities. Yet these advantages were counteracted by the strict behavioral expectations imposed on women of high status. Noble women especially lived constrained, sheltered lives, seldom allowed to leave their lavish surroundings. When they did step out for occasions like temple ceremonies or weddings, they would be draped in several layers of opulent kimono, their faces obscured by intricate screens. For an upper-class lady, etiquette was everything. From a young age, girls underwent rigorous training in the arts of calligraphy, poetry, music, and the appreciation of incense. Emphasis was placed on grace, refinement, and unwavering discretion. Even a noblewoman's manner of walking was dictated, small, shuffling steps with lowered eyes, a practiced display of submissive compliance. While peasant women were valued for their ability to bear children and labor relentlessly, noble women's worth hinged on their virginity, fertility, and unblemished reputation. A mere hint of scandal could irreparably damage a high-ranking woman's standing and marriage prospects. Any reputational fallout could also affect her entire family's social status by association. Consequently, it was vital for women of the ruling class to cultivate impeccable demeanor and untainted virtue. Although they might have enjoyed more luxuries than their lower-class counterparts, the restrictions of propriety and lineage bound them just as tightly. Nevertheless, in this strictly hierarchical setup, there were a few exceptional women who managed to rise above the limitations placed on their gender to exert meaningful influence and power. These remarkable women, whether due to their lineage, charismatic nature, or relentless determination, forged their own niches in the predominantly male domains of governance and warfare. One such extraordinary individual was Hojo Masako, who was born around 1157 into a powerful samurai family. At the age of 13, she was married to the ambitious warlord Minamoto no Yoritomo. However, this was not just any political alliance. Masako's father had been a competitor of Yoritomo, a conflict that culminated in the execution of her male relatives and the subjugation of her clan by the Minamoto. The marriage was likely designed to mitigate the threat of retaliation from the Hojo, but Masako was far from a passive participant accepting her family's defeat. From the outset, she utilized her intelligence and courage to overturn the disadvantage imposed by the husband who had defeated her kin. Masako swiftly established herself as an invaluable advisor to Yoritomo, while he sought to consolidate his authority. Her sharp political insight and samurai heritage equipped her to be a clever strategist and administrator. As his confidant and co-strategist, she played a crucial role in helping him usurp the ruling Taira clan, rising to become Japan's supreme military leader, the first shogun. Yoritomo clearly acknowledged his wife as a formidable partner, reportedly referring to her as his other self. Some of his top generals even lamented the excessive influence Masako held over the powerful warlord. Yet, she was just beginning her ascent. Following Yoritomo's unexpected death in 1199, she wasted no time in securing her clan's standing. In an audacious move, Masako appointed her father as regent for her son, the young shogun, effectively positioning the Hojo as the actual rulers behind the throne. For the ensuing 2 decades, Masako served as the guiding force of the shogunate, orchestrating her clan's supremacy. Although she was obligated to govern through male figures, there was no doubt that Masako was the one truly directing the course of power. She had established her position at the very pinnacle of feudal authority, a feat nearly unimaginable for a woman of that era. Masako's relentless ambition and resilience in the face of challenges were truly remarkable. That a young bride from a vanquished lineage could ascend to a role where she influenced the shogunate's decisions highlights her sharp intellect, strategic acumen, and unwavering determination. Although she could not entirely evade the customary restrictions and humiliations faced by women, she expanded their boundaries farther than most could ever envision. Nevertheless, Masako and her contemporaries were the outliers that confirmed the prevailing norms in feudal Japan. For the vast majority of women, life and identity were largely eclipsed by their responsibilities as wives and mothers, with scant autonomy or self-direction granted to them. Even the experiences of pregnancy and childbirth, which are among a woman's most basic biological functions, were strictly regulated by the cultural beliefs and superstitions of the time. Menstruating women were regarded as ritually impure, their blood deemed dangerously contaminating. During their monthly cycles, women were often restricted to separate quarters and forbidden from food preparation or entering sacred areas. This stigma also surrounded childbirth, with designated huts known as ubuya established away from the main residence for women to give birth. These birthing shelters were dark, unclean, and poorly ventilated, mirroring the negative perceptions associated with the process. After giving birth, the new mother was expected to remain in isolation in the ubuya for several days or even weeks until she was considered purified. Only then could she rejoin her family with her newborn. This isolation during such a vulnerable period, treated as if she were afflicted, underscores the deep-seated discomfort concerning the essential female gift of creating life. The deep-rooted taboos surrounding the mysteries of womanhood, perceived as both enchanting and disquieting, molded societal views for centuries. Even as the feudal period transitioned into the more contemporary Meiji era in the late 19th century, these ingrained stigmas lived on. The perceived impurity associated with women's biology was even enshrined in the Meiji Civil Code established in 1896. This legal framework for families, while seemingly a step towards modernization, maintained many of the archaic injustices and patriarchal norms. Women faced criminal charges for adultery, whereas men did not. Additionally, women had to adhere to a 6-month waiting period before remarrying after a divorce due to an outdated belief that they would not be aware of the father of any child born shortly after. Until the mid-20th century, numerous temples and sumo wrestling events continued to prohibit women due to taboos surrounding menstruation. Certain Shinto shrines had designated stones on which women could stand to observe festivals, carefully ensuring they did not desecrate the sacred site. These lingering instances of gender bias, remnants of the feudal past, highlighted the entrenched and rigid beliefs about women's inherent inferiority within Japanese culture. Despite the significant social changes occurring in the late 1800s, authentic female liberation would reveal itself as a gradual and incremental struggle against centuries of oppressive traditions. Nevertheless, even during the medieval period, some women were valiantly pushing against their assigned roles, discovering unconventional spaces for themselves at the edges of this male-dominated society. An unexpected area where women could sometimes exercise a degree of autonomy and influence was, rather surprisingly, within religious communities. Buddhism, introduced to Japan in the 6th century, gradually gained popularity over the following centuries. By the time of the feudal era, it had firmly established itself as one of the country's leading religions, alongside the native practice of Shintoism. These belief systems interwove to profoundly shape Japanese culture and daily life. For women in particular, Buddhism provided rare opportunities for education, leadership, and spiritual power that were typically denied to them in secular contexts. Noble women often chose to take vows as nuns, sometimes following the death of their husbands, or as a means of breaking free from the restrictions of arranged marriages. Within the walls of convents and monasteries, these women were liberated from their usual household responsibilities and devoted themselves to scripture, meditation, and aesthetic discipline. Some even had the chance to embark on pilgrimages to sacred locations or study under prominent monks. religion offered a rare opportunity for women to exist independently of their identities as wives, mothers, and daughters. The temple Hokkaji in En serves as a significant illustration of this issue. Established in 745 by Empress Komo, Hokkaji became Japan's first convent specifically created for the purpose of praying for the soul of the Empress's late mother. The temple featured expansive grounds that housed both nuns and monks, with women taking on roles as abbesses and administrators. For centuries, Hoki flourished as a center for female Buddhist practice and learning. Court ladies and noblewomen from various regions of Japan would travel there to take religious vows and engage deeply in clerical life. The convent became famous for its stunning gardens, serene environment, and the intellectual prowess of its nuns. Heiji exemplifies the unyielding spirit of women who sought pathways for growth and introspection in a world that aimed to bind them to domestic duties. It symbolizes the deep-seated desire for knowledge and self-fulfillment that simmered just beneath the calm exteriors of even the most privileged women's lives. Empress Komo herself personified the type of quiet resistance. Moisuke Chiyome was another extraordinary woman who broke societal norms in feudal Japan. Hailing from the influential Koga ninja clan, Moisuke lost her samurai husband, Moisuke Murasaki, in the Battle of Okahazama in 1560. Newly widowed in her mid-20s, Moisuke could have withdrawn into the expected life of a mourning noblewoman. Yet she approached her uncle, the formidable warlord Taida Shingen, with a bold proposition. Mochizuki envisioned a revolutionary type of combat unit, an all-female cadre of ninja agents specifically trained in espionage, sabotage, and assassination. In a world dominated by male samurai warfare, this concept was nearly unimaginable. Nevertheless, Taida recognized the potential in his niece's proposition and assigned her the task of turning it into reality. Consequently, Mochizuki embarked on constructing her network of kunoichi, or female ninja operatives. She enlisted girls and young women who had been orphaned, widowed, or abandoned by their families. These individuals, often marginalized by society, had little left to lose. Moisuke provided them with a fresh sense of purpose and a means to navigate a harsh existence. At Mochizuki's secret training camps nestled in the mountains, the kunoichi honed their skills in stealth, disguise, and infiltration. They learned to integrate seamlessly into various societal ranks, from the poorest peasants to the richest aristocrats. Moisuke rigorously trained them in martial arts, empowering them to handle daggers, throw shuriken, and apply lethal poisons. Perhaps most crucially, she equipped them with the ability to use their intelligence and feminine wiles to manipulate men and uncover critical secrets. Before long, Mochizuki had rallied a formidable force of 200 to 300 loyal kunoichi agents dedicated to her and the Taida clan. She sent them on operations deep into enemy territory, allowing them to navigate freely disguised as unsuspecting maids, entertainers, or priests. They eavesdropped in tea houses, seduced secrets from overly talkative officials, and, when necessary, executed key targets. Diligent and deadly, Mochizuki's kunoichi proved invaluable as the Takada clan's clandestine weapon. For more than a decade, up until the Taida clan's downfall in 1582, Moisuke's kunoichi network functioned in the shadows, altering the outcome of battles and shifting the balance of power. While the kunoichi were undeniably feared and effective, Moisuke's greatest contribution was demonstrating that women were equally capable of influencing history from behind the scenes. Through her innovative leadership, she provided numerous underprivileged women with an opportunity for independence in a society that frequently restricted their freedoms. The details of Mochizuki's fate following the fall of the Takada remain unclear, Yet her pioneering kunoichi force was just one of several ways remarkable women carved out influence and agency amidst the rigid gender norms of feudal Japan. Like a persistent thorn in the side of the samurai patriarchal system, Machisuki and her female ninja operatives left a lasting legacy in history, one entwined with fog and enigma, much like the kunoichi themselves. However, while women such as Moisuke occasionally broke barriers, they were largely the exception rather than the rule. For most women in feudal Japan, the primary aim in life was not to shape history, but to bear children who would ensure the continuation of their husband's lineage. The pressure to provide heirs, particularly male offspring, was overwhelming. A married woman's value was primarily determined by her fertility and her capacity to deliver the next generation for her husband's family. Childbearing in feudal Japan was fraught with peril. Medical knowledge was rudimentary compared to contemporary standards, and women typically gave birth at home, often accompanied solely by a midwife or female family members. Complications such as preeclampsia, obstructed labor, and postpartum hemorrhage resulted in countless maternal fatalities. Infants also faced high mortality rates due to infections, malnutrition, or congenital defects. For peasant women, who were expected to return to grueling labor in the fields shortly after childbirth, the dangers were even more pronounced. Take the example of Nano Teo, a farmer's wife from 14th century Ume province. Married at the tender age of 15 to a man twice her age, Nano was expected to labor alongside him in the rice paddies and mulberry fields, in addition to managing household duties like cooking, cleaning, and sewing for her in-laws. Within a year of her marriage, she found herself with child. The delivery of her baby boy proved to be a long and agonizing ordeal. Squatting on the earthen floor of her hut, Nano toiled for 2 days until she became almost delirious from exhaustion. The village midwife, an elderly woman with a distinct scent of sweat and herbs, murmured prayers and kneaded Nano's straining abdomen. When the baby finally emerged, blue and alarmingly silent, Nano shut her eyes, convinced that her suffering had been for nothing. But then a faint wail filled the air as the midwife smacked the newborn to life. This child would survive. Over the following 20 years, Nano would endure this experience repeatedly, a total of 6 times. 4 of her children would live, while one, a girl, would perish shortly after birth, taking a piece of Nano's already battered heart with her. In the intervals between pregnancies, Nano fetched water, crushed millet, and cared for fevers while enduring grinding poverty and seasonal hunger. The children she brought into the world were both her greatest comfort and her heaviest burden. Nano was merely one of countless unrecognized women who constituted the foundation of feudal Japanese society. With no means of birth control and little control over their destinies, they were expected to bear as many children as their physical conditions allowed. Even those who were fortunate and affluent could never fully escape the dangers of childbirth or the societal compulsion to continue producing heirs until they either succeeded or died in the effort. Yet, through their sacrifices, these nameless mothers contributed to one significant force for change within feudal society: the Buddhist nunneries that provided women with a rare alternative to marriage and motherhood. Though life in these religious communities was far from easy, taking vows allowed some girls to evade the unending cycle of pregnancy and labor while gaining a degree of education and autonomy. Within the cloisters, they could learn to read and write, exploring poetry, music, or crafts in a relative state of peace. A notable example is Hojo Masako, a noblewoman from a significant samurai lineage. Defying societal expectations, Hojo chose not to marry and instead became a lay nun at the age of 33. From the sanctuary of her family's temple, She provided counsel to her male relatives on military tactics and played a crucial role in navigating the clan through perilous political challenges for many years. Although she dedicated herself to a life of quiet devotion to the Buddha, her remarkable political insight earned her the daunting nickname of the Nun Shogun, a formidable force operating behind the throne while draped in the simplicity of a nun's attire. For Hojo, the spiritual life was both a safe haven and a source of power, enabling her talents to thrive outside the constraints of marriage and motherhood. She wielded the Dharma like a samurai would his sword, creating a niche for her own authority and intelligence in a feudal Japan dominated by men. Through her support and leadership, she undoubtedly motivated other women to seek their own unconventional avenues toward enlightenment and autonomy, even amidst the strict boundaries of their era's gender roles. As the sun climbed above Hojo's temple and the sound of well-worn sandals echoed through the quiet halls on their way to morning prayers, a new generation of Japanese girls began to dream of lives that ventured beyond traditional expectations. With each modest bowl of rice and every powerful chant, they nurtured the fragile shoot of female empowerment, yearning for a future where all women could carve out their own destinies. Until that day arrived, the nunneries stood as a valued refuge, allowing women to redefine themselves amidst a society that often viewed them merely as vessels for future generations of men. From grand temples to the humblest of peasant homes, feudal Japan presented a rich tapestry of women's experiences and destinies. While the period was starkly inequitable, with women's roles constrained by rigid societal customs and patriarchal authority. However, amidst these limitations, women such as Mochizuki Chiyomi, Hojo Masako, and numerous unrecognized heroines managed to impact history and imprint their influence on a society that frequently overlooked their abilities and sacrifices. Through cunning, perseverance, and subtle defiance, they established the foundation for the gradual progression towards women's liberation in Japan, a path that would span many more centuries. As we settle down for the night, let's dream of them, the forgotten kunoichi, the sagacious elder nuns, the battle-hardened widows, and the bright-eyed peasant girls. May we pay tribute to their strength and carry on their heritage, recognizing that we all stand on the shoulders of the trailblazing women who preceded us. Sleep well, and may your dreams reflect a world reshaped by the strength of women. The later years of women in feudal Japan often brought heightened difficulties and fragility, particularly for those who had endured the dangers of numerous childbirths. By the time they reached their 40s and 50s, many were deemed old, having left their youth and fertility behind. Those fortunate enough to still have a living husband faced the looming prospect of widowhood, as men typically passed away before their wives due to warfare, hazardous jobs, or the harshness of life. The future of a widow could be uncertain and precarious. With minimal means to generate an income, she depended on the assistance of her adult children or male family members. If she had no relatives to rely on, or they were unable or unwilling to provide support, she might have to resort to begging for survival. Imagine an elderly woman, her body weary from years of hard labor, her face etched with sadness and worry, extending a shaking hand to passers-by on the street, hoping for a few coins or leftover food. Some older women found solace and stability in faith. Buddhism provided a socially acceptable route for widows or those in search of a more contemplative existence. Women had the option to become nuns, spending their remaining days within the simple and structured environment of a temple. There, older women might discover a sense of belonging with their peers, along with a more profound purpose in their dedication to faith and community service. Wealthier women who had the resources could embark on pilgrimages to sacred destinations, acquiring spiritual merit for the next life while temporarily escaping domestic responsibilities in their later years. However, this level of independence was uncommon. Most older women continued to live under the authority of a male family member, adhering to the traditions of filial duty and submission they had followed since youth. A particularly intriguing case of a woman who exerted influence even in her elder years is Hojo Masako. Born into the influential Hojo clan in 1156, Masako skillfully navigated the complex landscape of feudal politics. She wed the shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo and bore him 2 sons, ensuring the continuation of their lineage. Following her husband's passing, Masako became a lay nun, a typical path for elite widows. Yet instead of retreating quietly to a temple, she continued to influence events from behind the scenes. Through astute political strategies, she aided her father and later her second son in becoming shoguns, solidifying the Hojo clan's supremacy. Masako communicated with officials, issued commands, and even led troops in battles to safeguard her family's interests. Dubbed the nun shogun, Masako challenged norms to maintain influence in a male-centric system, earning reluctant respect from both allies and adversaries. However, such an extraordinary figure was the exception rather than the norm. Her status as a high-ranking samurai afforded her significantly more freedom than was available to ordinary women. For the vast majority, aging meant confronting a decline in options and an increase in dependence, as the limitations and inequalities that defined their lives grew ever more pronounced. As a woman's life neared its end, she would have the opportunity to reflect on the narrow path she had traversed. From a formative stage centered around preparations for marriage to an adulthood dedicated to bearing children and fulfilling men's needs, and ultimately to old age dependent on the kindness of male relatives, she experienced a great deal with scant opportunity to shape her own destiny. Perhaps as she lay on her deathbed, she would reflect on the lives of her daughters and granddaughters. Would their experiences differ, or would they too be shackled by the same rigid gender norms and societal expectations? Change, if it were to occur, would likely be gradual. The painful legacy of women's struggles and resilience in feudal Japan would persist for generations. As we conclude our exploration of the life stages of women in this era, we can only express admiration for their tenacity and strength. From their birth to their final moments, they confronted unthinkable challenges and limitations. Yet in the face of adversity, they discovered ways to endure and even carve out small spaces of autonomy and significance in a world stacked against them. Their narratives serve as poignant reminders of the deep-rooted inequalities and injustices of the past and the continuous fight for women's rights and freedoms that persists today. By recognizing and honoring the experiences of these historical women, we can draw motivation for the ongoing efforts required to forge a fairer and more equitable world for all. As we prepare to rest, let us carry the memory of these women, the countless nameless individuals who labored and persevered in the background of history, in our hearts. May their bravery and determination illuminate the path ahead as we aspire to create a future where every individual, irrespective of gender, can enjoy a life filled with dignity, opportunity, and choice. Those who were lucky enough to have children who survived, particularly sons, could anticipate some care in their later years. In contrast, countless women who found themselves widowed, childless, or impoverished faced an autumn of life marked by increased hardship and solitude. Without any social safety nets or support systems apart from their families, older women had to rely on their relatives or lack of them. Those fortunate enough could live with their grown children and assist in raising their grandchildren, watching as another generation of women began the same challenging cycle anew. However, many others were completely overlooked, treated as burdens with little to contribute. On the outskirts of society, some widows and single women sought refuge in spirituality, becoming Buddhist nuns or dedicating themselves to religious communities. During their final years in temple life, these women could discover a sliver of purpose, support, and a sense of belonging in a world that otherwise cast them away. The Buddhist ideals of detachment and overcoming worldly suffering may have provided some comfort to these weary souls. Yet a significant number of elderly women had no such opportunities available to them. Without a temple accepting them, children to depend on, or means for self-sufficiency, they were left destitute and in despair. In the shadows of villages and towns, these overlooked women fought for survival through any means available to them, begging, foraging, or quietly fading away. Their struggles stood as a harsh reminder of the fragility of female existence in feudal Japan, where a woman's well-being was perpetually contingent upon the men in her life. As a woman approached the end of her life, she could reflect on a lifetime molded by her society's rigid structures. From the moment she took her first breath as a wrapped infant, her future was predetermined. It was a narrow pathway bound by duty, compliance, and self-denial. At every step, her value had been assessed based on her usefulness to the men who directed her fate. Her moments of happiness and comfort were few, while her challenges and struggles were numerous. Yet in her quieter times, she might have also recalled the small victories and hidden strengths that had supported her. The inner resilience she developed by facing each day in a world marked by inequality. The supportive connections she formed with other women, even as societal standards sought to isolate and silence them. The glimmers of beauty, affection, and joy that shone brightly even amidst the bleakest of times. As her eyes finally shut for the last time, she left a multifaceted legacy, one of oppression intertwined with an unyielding spirit, of victimhood and subtle defiance, of lives only partially lived and battles fiercely fought. Her narrative was one shared by countless women before her, and those who would follow, all navigating an unjust world with as much determination and grace as they could summon. Even though the currents of history seemed stagnant in feudal Japan, this woman and her counterparts helped lay the groundwork for a gradually evolving society. In both significant and subtle ways, acknowledged and unobserved, the women of feudal Japan transcended being mere victims of their era. They were architects of a future that was beyond their comprehension, but one they would never see come to fruition. So, as we drift into slumber tonight, let us create a space in our hearts for these women of yesteryears and the lives they lived. May we respect their struggles, celebrate their strengths, and draw inspiration from their quiet bravery. Let us commit to guiding the long arc of history towards a reality where every woman can embrace her entire being, liberated and unburdened. Ultimately, it is clear that a woman's social standing significantly impacted her quality of life in feudal Japan. Women in peasant households endured grueling work in the fields alongside their husbands and children. Rising before the sun, they planted and harvested rice, the essential crop essential for the nation's sustenance. With their calloused hands, they used heavy tools to cultivate the land. Babies carried on their backs, they endured hours of labor under the blazing sun and relentless rain. Hunger lingered as an ever-present fear, with a poor harvest potentially leading to starvation. In contrast, the wives of samurai were exempt from this grueling agricultural work. As members of the warrior class, they occupied a position of higher status and enjoyed a better quality of life. Nevertheless, their existence was anything but leisurely. Their main responsibilities included managing household affairs and serving their husbands and in-laws. Some samurai women also acquired self-defense skills, equipping themselves to protect their homes and communities during their husbands' absences at war. They became adept at handling the naginata, a long curved blade mounted on a pole, demonstrating both strength and precision. A remarkable example is Hojo Masako, who lived from 1156 to 1295. Born into the influential Hojo clan, she was married at just 15 to Shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo to solidify a political alliance. Following her husband's death, Masako seized control to protect her family's influence. With clever strategy, she guided her clan to secretly dominate the shogunate for over a century. Known as the nun shogun, she became a Buddhist nun later in life, but never relinquished her power. Despite Masako's prominence, the vast majority of samurai women were confined to domestic roles, tasked with all household chores such as cleaning, cooking, and sewing. Creating and mending the family's garments was a never-ending responsibility. Utilizing spindles and looms, women spun fabric from cotton and silk, crafting kimono, hakama trousers, and other attire. Their skills were evident in the detailed embroidery and elaborate dyeing. A samurai wife took great pride in her family's polished appearance, as their clothing indicated their social standing and prestige. For noble women at the pinnacle of society, life was often confining and oppressive. Secluded within expansive castle estates, the daughters of daimyos and aristocrats seldom left their sheltered confines. Their environment was characterized by exquisite screens, tatami mats, and luxurious brocade cushions. Yet, under this opulence, there existed a restrictive gilded cage. Noble women occupied their days within the women's quarters, separate from men. They engaged in leisurely pursuits appropriate to their status, such as calligraphy, flower arranging, poetry, and music. The soft strumming of a koto and the gentle stroke of a brush on paper reverberated through the corridors. Social etiquette held immense importance. Noble women were anticipated to excel in the nuances of conversation and proper conduct to enhance their family's reputation. Their speech, posture, and movements were meticulously refined. Intricate beauty routines consumed their hours. They let their hair grow long, adorned in shimmering garments that cascaded beyond their waists. The styling of their hair was a meticulous chore, washed with rice water, treated with oils, and fashioned into graceful styles with the assistance of pins and combs. Faces were covered in a ghostly white powder, eyebrows meticulously plucked and elevated high on the forehead. Teeth were darkened with a sticky iron solution, which was deemed attractive. All this preparation aimed to fulfill the noble lady's primary duty of being a sought-after bride to secure a favorable match for her family. Marriages among the elite were strategic alliances rather than romantic unions, intended to solidify wealth, territory, and political power. A noblewoman was but a pawn in this power game, her existence not truly her own. Once married, often as a young teenager, she would transition to her husband's household. There, a noble wife had to skillfully navigate the complex dynamics of court politics and rivalries. Gaining the favor of her mother-in-law and husband was essential for her status. However, noblemen frequently maintained several concubines, and a wife's standing could be eclipsed at any moment by a younger, favored mistress. The primary wives of elite men held the most influence and respect due to their role in bearing heirs. In contrast, the lives of secondary wives and concubines were often marked by loneliness and instability. Even surrounded by plush comfort, the emotional and mental strain on noblewomen was profound. Their lives revolved around fulfilling the desires of men who valued them solely for their beauty, ability to reproduce, and lineage. Their lives were marked by a stifling sense of void. They channeled their unspoken grief and hidden aspirations into poetry and journals, which served as their primary means of self-expression. Outside the elite tier, women across different social strata sought refuge from the stringent gender norms through religion. Buddhism had proliferated throughout Japan during the feudal period, and women found it to be a pathway to enlightenment and community service. Embracing the life of a nun provided a rare distinction from the expected routes of marriage and motherhood. Women of all backgrounds, from the aristocracy to samurai spouses and peasant women, often took vows and entered convents in their later years, frequently following the loss of their husbands. Within the sacred order, they achieved freedom from the subjugation of everyday life. As nuns, they could commit themselves to spiritual practices, temple duties, and charitable endeavors. Some even rose to become prominent abbesses, leading religious communities and influencing the course of Buddhism. A notable figure was Empress Komo, who lived in the 8th century. Originally Princess Asukabimi, she married Emperor Shomu and reigned alongside him. A committed Buddhist, Ko utilized her high-status role to promote the Dharma. She established Hoki, a magnificent temple, and commissioned the breathtaking Kofuku-ji temple complex. At these locations, the empress created orders of nuns and convents to educate women. Komo's most lasting contribution was the field of compassion, an extensive charitable initiative aimed at helping the poor and the sick. She allocated extensive tracts of land for crop cultivation to feed those in need. Additionally, the empress founded hospitals and dispensaries to care for the ill and distributed clothing to the less fortunate. Some sources suggest that she even carried firewood to the homes of the impoverished, providing comfort and dignity with her own hands. In the narrative of Komeo's life, we glimpse how women could surpass the usual confines of gender and social class through their devotion to religion and acts of kindness. Yet for the majority, the chains of tradition and obligation were not easily cast off. From birth to death, their existences were restricted by the limited roles dictated by their gender. The ideal of femininity in feudal Japan called for docility, compliance, chastity, and most importantly, the relinquishment of personal aspirations for the sake of family harmony. This left scant opportunity for women to carve out their own identities or find satisfaction. As time passed and a woman aged, she remained enmeshed in this cycle of obligation. If she was fortunate enough to navigate the dangers of childbirth and nurture her children into adulthood, her later years would often be spent under the care of her sons and daughters-in-law. Nonetheless, even in old age, a woman would still find herself subordinate to the male members of her family. Widows, lacking a husband or son to depend on, faced particular vulnerability, relying on relatives for support or, worse, resorting to begging on the streets. In this final phase of life, some sought comfort in faith, undertaking journeys to sacred places or retreating to monasteries. Others invested their hard-won knowledge in mentoring younger generations, aiming to shield them from some of the hardships they endured. Yet for many, the end was marked by silence, with their stories untold and their struggles overlooked. They exited this life as they had lived it, unnoticed and uncelebrated. Reflecting on centuries past, we catch mere glimpses of women's lives in feudal Japan. Through the faint ink on aged pages, in the movements of a pen or the stitches of fabric, their stories reach us in pieces. The poems, journals, and tales they left behind offer hints at the joys and sorrows, successes and challenges that shape their daily existence. What comes to light is a testament to their resilience in the face of adversity. Despite being bound by a stringent social hierarchy, women discovered ways to derive significance and beauty from their given circumstances. They gave birth and nurtured their children, labored diligently, and maneuvered through court intrigues and village conflicts. A few, through resolute determination or unexpected turns of fate, even ascended to positions of influence in a realm that denied them formal authority. Nevertheless, the predominant experience for most women was one of subjugation, their lives dedicated to serving men. The various roles they assumed, whether as wives, mothers, daughters, or concubines, were not choices but rather preordained identities. Being a woman in feudal Japan meant existing within the rigid confines of this narrative, enduring the burdens of elaborate costumes and often sorrowful fates. In today's world, it's all too simple to perceive these women's lives as distant and alien, separated from us by an unbridgeable gap of time and culture. Yet if we listen intently to the echoes that traverse the ages, we might uncover a shared thread that connects us to our ancestors. For while the trappings of their tales may differ, the struggles of the human heart remain unchanged. Confronted with deep-seated inequalities, women of both the past and present have had to forge their own routes to fulfillment, creating spaces for autonomy and self-expression wherever possible. They have openly and subtly fought to expand their available roles and to rewrite the narratives that sought to confine their capabilities. This may well be the lasting legacy of the women from feudal Japan, a testament to the relentless spark of the human spirit that refuses to be extinguished, regardless of the formidable forces against it. Thus, as we conclude this historical chapter, let us carry forward the lessons imparted by these women's lives. Let us honor their sacrifices and celebrate their triumphs, no matter how small or overlooked. For the majority of women, a life of religious devotion often provided a source of comfort and stability rather than intrigue during their advanced years. Undertaking pilgrimages to sacred sites offered older women a rare opportunity to experience a measure of independence and mobility in a society that typically confined them to their homes. These spiritual journeys permitted them to travel and engage socially outside their usual surroundings. Less fortunate women, lacking family backing, participated in pilgrimages out of necessity as sanctioned avenues for gathering alms. Some became permanent wanderers, drifting from shrine to make a living. Whether in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment or essential sustenance, a woman's later years were generally uncertain and reliant on male support. With limited means to fend for themselves, a lack of legal rights and declining physical capability, an elderly peasant woman might only hope for the patience of male relatives, or, if that failed, the generosity of monks and nuns. Thus, from birth to death, a woman's journey in feudal Japan was seldom a matter of her own choosing. Significant life events, birth, maturation, marriage, childbirth, widowhood, monastic vows, and death, were dictated by the harsh realities of a patriarchal culture. At every juncture, her value was closely linked to her contributions to family continuity and her role within the domestic domain. While some women challenged these limitations with greater defiance than others, such as rebel nuns, forward-thinking individuals, and even women warriors, they were notable precisely because they broke away from societal expectations. The ideal of the dutiful wife and wise mother left scant room for such deviations. Over time, this feminine archetype became increasingly ingrained. Even as feudal Japan transitioned into the modern era, many remnants of the feudal perspective regarding women persisted, continuing to assess their worth based on obedience, procreation, and domestic responsibilities. For most women, religious life was more about finding comfort and safety in their later years than engaging in schemes or political maneuvering. Undertaking pilgrimages to sacred sites was another avenue for older women to gain a semblance of independence and mobility in a society that often confined them to their homes. These journeys presented a rare opportunity to visit new places and interact with others outside their villages under the guise of spiritual commitment. Women from poorer backgrounds without family support often participated in these pilgrimages out of necessity, using it as an acceptable form of begging. Some even became full-time pilgrims, traversing from one shrine to another to make a living. Whether in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment or simply basic nutrition, a woman's later years frequently remained unstable and reliant on men. Lacking viable means of self-sustenance, without legal rights, and facing diminishing physical strength, an elderly peasant woman could only hope for the kindness of her male relatives, or, if that failed, the aid of monks and nuns. Thus, from birth to death, a woman's journey in feudal Japan was seldom of her own choosing. Major life events, birth, coming of age, marriage, motherhood, widowhood, entering a religious order, and death, were all dictated by the strictures of a deeply patriarchal society. At every phase, her value was linked to her contributions to the family and her role within the domestic realm. While some women challenged these limitations more openly than others, the feudal period produced its share of rebellious nuns, unconventional thinkers, and even warrior women whose differences were notable precisely because they contradicted widely accepted ideals. The archetype of the good wife and wise mother left little space for such variations. Over time, this representation of femininity only became more deeply rooted. Even as Japan transitioned away from feudalism towards modernity, remnants of the feudal perspective on women, assessing their worth based on obedience, fertility, and household responsibilities, proved remarkably enduring. While the rigid structures of class and samurai tradition have diminished, traces of ancient beliefs about a woman's role still influence contemporary expectations. Naturally, the years since have ushered in significant advancements and freedoms that would have seemed inconceivable to women during the era of warring states. Yet the lingering burden of historical inertia can be slow to dissolve, and even present-day societies wrestle with unresolved inequalities rooted in the past. For the women during feudal Japan, the notion of good old days was seldom accurate. They labored under conditions that would make even the bravest samurai hesitate. However, their tenacity, inventiveness, and dignity in the face of persistent oppression are truly admirable. Through centuries of turmoil and hardship, these women quietly held their communities together, household by household. Amidst wars, famines, and catastrophes, they raised new generations while passing down vital knowledge, skills, and cultural legacies. Their sacrifices and resilience, though largely unrecognized, contributed to the endurance of a civilization. So the next time you observe a graciously smiling geisha or a kimono-clad noblewoman in a historical drama, reflect on the millennia of unimaginable hardship that those images obscure. Remember the countless unnamed individuals who battled and persevered in the shadow of feudal Japan's male-dominated society. Their personal victories and sorrows may be forgotten, but collectively, their narrative is one of inspiring determination and grace under pressure. With that, we have concluded our exploration into the troubling history of women's experiences in feudal Japan. I hope you found it both enlightening and oddly soothing. If you appreciated this dive into a frequently overlooked chapter of the past, please think about subscribing to this channel for more captivating bedtime narratives throughout history. There are many untold stories awaiting your discovery, with winding paths to carry you into dreamland. Until next time, sweet dreams, and sayonara from the land of the rising sun and setting daughters, this is your devoted storyteller, signing off.